They say you find out who people really are when someone dies. That's not quite right. You don't find out who they are. You just get confirmation of what you've always known, but were too polite, or too hopeful, or too beaten down to admit. For me, that confirmation didn't come at my father's funeral, a somber and performative affair where my brother Darren played the role of chief mourner with an Oscar-worthy performance. No, for me it came a week later, in the stale, wood-paneled conference room of a lawyer I'd never met. A man whose entire demeanor screamed, "I bill in 6-minute increments." The air was thick with the scent of old paper, lemon polish, and naked, undisguised greed. Across the heavy mahogany table, Darren sat with his shoulders squared, a portrait of feigned solemnity. He'd already measured the drapes in the CEO's office. He'd been measuring them for 20 years. He was the golden child, the heir apparent, the son who got the pats on the back while I got the condescending head tilts and the "we're just worried about you, Aaron" speeches. He was my father's pride, and I was his puzzle, a piece that never seemed to fit the perfect family picture he was trying to paint. Beside me, my wife Brenda was vibrating with a nervous energy that was almost painful to witness. Her knee bounced a frantic rhythm against mine under the table. She was trying to look sad, for appearances, but her eyes were sharp, glittering with the anticipation of a life she felt she was owed. A life of country club memberships and European vacations, funded by the sweat of a man she'd barely tolerated for the last decade of our marriage. My father, Thomas Holt, had built Holt Marine Logistics from a single rusty trawler into a multi-million-dollar shipping empire that dominated the Charleston port. Brenda hadn't married me, the quiet IT guy who preferred coding to schmoozing. She had married a future board seat. She had married a legacy. The lawyer, Mr. Fitzwilliam, cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense silence. He put on a pair of gold-rimmed spectacles and unfolded the will with a crisp theatrical crackle. "We are gathered to execute the last will and testament of Thomas Gregory Holt," he began, his voice a dry monotone. He droned through the usual legal preamble, the charitable donations, the bequests to a few distant cousins. Brenda's hand crept over and squeezed mine. Her palm was damp. I could feel her future, our future, hanging on the next few sentences. "To my beloved son Darren Michael Holt," Fitzwilliam read, his voice gaining a slight, almost imperceptible warmth. Darren straightened his tie, a subtle, smug adjustment. "I leave my life's work. I bequeath, in its entirety, Holt Marine Logistics, including all assets, holdings, properties, and operational control. May he lead it with the strength and vision I always knew he possessed." A soft, controlled exhale escaped Brenda's lips, a sound of a balloon deflating. Her hand went limp in mine. I watched Darren's face. He didn't smile, not outwardly, but a slow, satisfied flush crept up his neck. He dipped his head, a perfect imitation of a humble, grateful son accepting his birthright. He'd won. The race I never even knew I was running was over, and he'd lapped me a dozen times. I felt a strange sense of calm, a sort of detached resignation. This was exactly what I expected. It was the story of my life, the final chapter written in the same ink as all the others. Aaron, the reliable, the steady, the disappointment. Darren, the star. Then Fitzwilliam cleared his throat again. "And to my son, Aaron Thomas Holt." Brenda's head snapped up. Her eyes, just for a second, held a flicker of hope, a desperate dying ember. Maybe there was a stock portfolio, a trust fund, a summer house on the coast, something, anything. The lawyer continued, his voice now completely devoid of any emotion. "I leave my 1969 Ford Falcon, currently stored in the garage of my primary residence. May it serve you as well as it served me." Silence. It wasn't a shocked silence. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that presses down on you, that makes it hard to breathe. A car, a 50-year-old car that hadn't run in at least a decade, a monument of rust and faded seafoam green paint. That was it. That was the sum total of my inheritance, my reward for a lifetime of being the responsible one. I felt Brenda flinch beside me, as if she'd been physically struck. She pulled her hand away from mine like I was suddenly contagious. I chanced to glance at her. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. Her lips were a thin white line. It wasn't disappointment. It was revulsion. She was looking at me, but she was seeing a future of canceled credit cards and a life lived in the same beige apartment we'd been in for 8 years. Darren, bless his magnanimous heart, rose from his chair, walked around the table, and placed a heavy, patronizing hand on my shoulder. "Hey," he said, his voice dripping with pity. It's a classic, man. A real classic. We'll get her fixed up. He was already the benevolent king, offering scraps from the royal table. I just nodded. I couldn't find my voice. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot poker twisting in my gut. It wasn't about the money. It was about the statement, the public declaration, from beyond the grave, of my ultimate worthlessness in my father's eyes. He had given my brother a kingdom and handed me a child's toy. What none of them knew, what no one in that room could possibly comprehend, was the truth my father had hidden in plain sight. They didn't know about his late-night calls, his growing paranoia about corporate takeovers and Darren's reckless spending. They didn't know that in his final years my father had become obsessed with creating a legacy that couldn't be squandered by a fool in a fancy suit. They saw a rusty car. They didn't see the Trojan horse. They didn't know that my father, the brilliant, paranoid old man, had converted the company's entire ownership into a single physical, unregistered bearer bond, a relic of an older, more secretive financial world. And to make it invisible to everyone but the person he intended to find it, he had his private attorney create a bizarre but legally ironclad trust, tying the ownership of that bond directly to the car's unique vehicle identification number. Darren thought he was the new CEO. He was about to find out he was just a manager, a placeholder warming the seat for the real owner. The legal title to that rusty Ford Falcon, and therefore the entire multi-million-dollar company, was about to be in my name. He was my brother, the golden child, the new king, and I, the family disappointment, was about to become his new boss. It wasn't about revenge, not yet, anyway. It was about justice, but I had a feeling the line between the two was about to get very, very blurry. The drive home from the lawyer's office was the longest 20 minutes of my life. The silence in our modest sedan was a weapon, and Brenda was wielding it with surgical precision. She sat ramrod straight in the passenger seat, staring out the window, her jaw so tight I was surprised her teeth didn't shatter. I tried once, just once. "Brenda," I started, my voice sounding weak even to my own ears. "Don't," she snapped, not even turning her head. "Just don't, Aaron. Don't you dare say a single word." So I didn't. I just drove, my hands gripping the steering wheel, until my knuckles were white. I could feel her judgment radiating off her in waves, a cold, bitter front moving in. We walked into our apartment, the one she'd always called temporary, and the moment the door clicked shut behind us, the dam broke. "A car," she shrieked, whirling on me. Her face was mottled with rage, her eyes blazing. "A goddamn rusty, useless piece of junk car. Are you kidding me? Is this a joke?" "Brenda, calm down, calm down," she laughed, a high, hysterical sound that had no humor in it. "Don't you tell me to calm down. My entire life, our entire future, just went up in smoke, and you want me to be calm? Darren gets a shipping empire, and you get a tetanus shot on wheels. What are we supposed to do with that, Aaron? Drive it to the soup kitchen?" Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, striking right at the heart of my own insecurity, my own humiliation. She was voicing the ugliest thoughts that were already swirling in my own head. "I spent 10 years, Aaron," she went on, pacing the small living room like a caged animal. 10 years of smiling at your father's boring stories. 10 years of pretending to like your brother's insufferable girlfriend. 10 years of telling my friends, "Oh, Aaron's father owns Holt Marine." I swallowed all of it. I played the game. I did my part. What the hell were you doing? It was his decision, Bren. What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to be a son he respected. She spat. You were supposed to be a man. Darren was in there, schmoozing, playing golf, making deals. He was securing his future. You were in the back room, fixing his servers, crunching his numbers, like some glorified clerk. You let them walk all over you. You let your father see you as a doormat, and now we get to be wiped on for the rest of our lives. The word clerk hung in the air between us. That's all I was to her, to all of them. The helpful, quiet background character. The one who made sure the machinery worked so the stars of the show could take their bows. It wasn't about love, or partnership, or us against the world. It was about what I could provide, and I had just been officially valued at one 1969 Ford Falcon. She stopped pacing and looked at me, her eyes cold and assessing. "I need some air," she said, her voice flat. I'm going to go stay with my sister for a few days. I need to think. I knew what think meant. It meant she was going to call her sister, who had married a dentist, and they were going to spend the next 72 hours dissecting my failures as a man and mapping out Brenda's exit strategy. She didn't say we need to think. She said I. The shift was subtle, but it was seismic. The team of us had been officially disbanded. Brenda, wait, I pleaded, a wave of desperation washing over me. She just shook her head, grabbing her purse and keys from the counter. I can't even look at you right now, Aaron, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. The door slammed shut, and the silence that followed was 1,000 times worse than her shouting. I sank onto the couch, the cheap fabric groaning under my weight. The apartment suddenly felt hollow, a flimsy movie set for a life that was no longer real. I was completely and utterly alone, and in that crushing solitude, the memories came flooding back, not as a gentle stream, but as a tidal wave pulling me under. I remembered being 22, freshly graduated with a degree in computer science. I was so proud. I'd built a small inventory tracking program for one of my professors, and it had gotten some attention. I had an idea to expand it, to create a proprietary logistics suite that could be sold to small businesses. All I needed was a little seed money, maybe $20,000 to get it off the ground. I'd prepared a full proposal, a business plan, spreadsheets. I presented it to my father in his big leather armchair, the one that smelled of old books and power. He scanned it with a dismissive air. "This is cute, Aaron," he'd said, handing the folder back to me. "But you're a tech guy, not a businessman. It's a fine hobby, but it's not a career. You need stability, something reliable." 2 weeks later, we were at one of those painfully formal family dinners. Darren, who had dropped out of college after 2 semesters, announced he had a revolutionary idea for a luxury concierge service for yachts. It was a half-baked concept, scribbled on a cocktail napkin, with no business plan and no research. My father had slapped him on the back, his voice booming with pride. "That's the spirit, thinking big. You need to get that off the ground, son." He'd pulled out his checkbook right there at the dinner table and written Darren a check for $50,000. "A little something to get you started," he'd said with a wink. The concierge service folded in 6 months. The $50,000 vanished into a haze of fancy parties and a leased BMW, and it was never mentioned again. But I never forgot. I never forgot the feeling of my carefully prepared proposal sitting on my desk at home, deemed a cute hobby, while Darren's napkin sketch was treated like a revelation. Years melted together in a montage of similar slights. I was the one who spent a whole Christmas holiday rebuilding the company's entire server infrastructure after it was hit with ransomware. I worked for 48 hours straight, sleeping on the floor of the server room, subsisting on cold coffee and vending machine crackers. When it was all fixed, my father had walked in, clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Good work, Aaron. Knew you could handle it." Then he'd turned to Darren, who had been on a ski trip in Aspen during the entire crisis. "Darren," he'd said, "I need you to take our biggest client, Mr. Henderson, out for a round of golf. Smooth things over, make him feel valued." Darren got the glory for saving the relationship, while I was just the guy who cleaned up the mess, the plumber who fixed the pipes so the lord of the manor could take a comfortable bath. It was the family mantra: Darren handles the people, Aaron handles the problems. One was a path to the throne, the other was a path to the servants' quarters. And Brenda, I couldn't even blame her, not really. I remembered when we first met. I'd just started doing some freelance work for Holt Marine, and she was an ambitious junior account manager at an ad agency we were using. When she found out who my father was, her interest in me sharpened. I was naive. I thought she was drawn to my quiet confidence, my stability. But looking back, I could see it all so clearly. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at my last name. She would ask endless questions about the company, about Darren, about my father's plans for the future. She pushed me to be more assertive, to ask for a formal title, to demand a bigger salary. I thought it was because she believed in me. But she didn't believe in me. She believed in my proximity to power. I was a stock she was investing in, and that stock had just been declared worthless. I sat there on that couch, for hours, letting the weight of it all crush me. The years of being overlooked, of being the family's reliable, invisible workhorse, the casual cruelty of my father's final act, the naked ambition and disgust of my wife. It was all too much. I felt like I was drowning. Finally, long after the sun had set, I pushed myself up. I had to get out of that apartment. I didn't know where I was going, but my feet carried me down to the parking garage, then over to the visitors section where the tow truck had deposited my inheritance earlier that day, and there it was, the 1969 Ford Falcon. It was even sadder looking than I remembered. A layer of grime covered the faded seafoam green paint. There were rust patches blooming along the wheel wells, and a spiderweb crack in the corner of the windshield. It looked forgotten, abandoned, a piece of junk, just like me. I pulled on the stiff door handle, and it opened with a loud groaning shriek. I slid into the driver's seat. The vinyl was cracked and hard, but the smell that hit me was a sudden sharp punch of nostalgia. It was the smell of my childhood, the smell of oil, old vinyl, and my father. Before he was the CEO, he was just Dad, and this was his car. He'd taught me to drive in this car, our hands sharing the massive steering wheel. My eyes started to burn. A wave of grief, raw and real, washed over me, eclipsing the anger and humiliation. This wasn't just a car, it was the last piece of my father I had left, the last tangible thing. My hand drifted to the glove compartment, expecting it to be empty. I pulled the latch, and the door fell open with a thud. Inside was the original owner's manual, in its plastic sleeve, a book of faded gas station maps, and a single thick cream-colored envelope. My name was written on the front in my father's distinctive spiky handwriting, Aaron. My heart started to pound, a slow, heavy drumbeat in my chest. My hands were trembling as I picked it up. The seal was unbroken. With a shaky finger I tore it open. Inside was a folded piece of stationery, the same heavy, expensive paper he used for his most important correspondence. I unfolded it and began to read. "My son," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and the will has been read. I imagine you are feeling hurt, confused, and perhaps betrayed. I imagine your brother is preening like a peacock, and your wife is looking at you with daggers in her eyes. For that I am truly sorry, but what I have done for a reason. I have given you a burden, but I have also given you a crown. You just have to be strong enough to wear it." I read on, my eyes devouring the words. He wrote about his growing fears in his last years. He'd seen a dozen smaller companies in Charleston get swallowed up by faceless international conglomerates. He wrote about his disappointment in Darren, his flash, his recklessness, his complete lack of respect for the work and sacrifice it took to build something that lasts. "Darren has the face of a king," he wrote, "but the judgment of a jester. He would sell this company for a pat on the back and a fast boat. He sees the company as a bank account, not a legacy." My breath caught in my throat. "You, Aaron," the letter continued, "you have the mind of a builder. You were the one who always saw the stress points, the inefficiencies. You understand the foundations. Darren knows how to throw a party. You know how to keep the ship from sinking. A king who only knows how to party will soon find himself with no kingdom left." And then he laid it all out. The plan, the insane, brilliant, paranoid plan. He explained that through his private attorney, a man named Howard Peterson, he had systematically and quietly liquidated his personal controlling shares in Holt Marine Logistics. He had converted the entire value, tens of millions of dollars, into a single high-denomination, unregistered bearer bond, an old-world financial instrument, almost a myth in the modern age, untraceable and belonging completely to whoever physically possessed it. But a piece of paper can be lost, stolen, or litigated over. He needed to hide it in plain sight. "The greatest treasures," he wrote, "are often hidden inside the things no one else sees value in." He had legally tied that bond, its entire immense value, to a physical object, an object he knew Darren, in his arrogance and obsession with shiny new things, would never want, an object he knew I, the sentimental son, would never throw away, the car. He had created a specialized legal trust, a chattel deed trust, that inextricably linked the ownership of the bearer bond to the legal title of the 1969 Ford Falcon, VIN 9H01L 156987. The will was a piece of theater, designed to throw everyone off the scent. Darren could have operational control, he could have the title of CEO, he could have the big office, but he didn't have the ownership. The car is the company's son, the letter concluded, and the legal title, which will be transferred to you clear of any probate claims, is the key to the kingdom. In the glove compartment, you will also find a key to a safe deposit box at Palmetto Heritage Bank. Inside that box is the bond itself, and all the documentation from Mr. Peterson you will need. The choice of what to do next is yours. You can be the clerk, or you can be the king. I hope you make the choice I never had the courage to tell you I believed you could make. Your father, Thomas. I sat there in the dark, dusty car, the letter shaking in my hands. The world had just tilted on its axis. The humiliation, the anger, the grief, it all began to recede, replaced by a feeling I hadn't felt in years. A cold, clear, and powerful resolve. This wasn't a car, it was a test, it was a weapon, and I finally understood. My father hadn't disowned me, he had armed me. The next morning, I felt like a different person. The fog of grief and despair had lifted, replaced by a sharp crystalline clarity. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The same tired eyes looked back, the same lines of stress around my mouth, but something inside had shifted. The stoop in my shoulders was gone. I was no longer a victim of my family's narrative. I was the author of my own. Brenda was still at her sister's. She'd sent a single text message overnight. Still need space. Don't call me. Fine, I needed space too. Space to think. Space to plan. My first call was to the man my father had named in his letter, Howard Peterson. I found his law firm online. It wasn't a flashy downtown office like Fitzwilliam's. It was a small, discreet practice in an old historic building a few blocks from the waterfront. When I gave his receptionist my name, I was put through immediately. Mr. Holt, a calm, steady voice, said on the other end of the line, "I've been expecting your call." An hour later I was sitting in Howard Peterson's office. It was the antithesis of the other lawyer's room. It was filled with books, not just law tomes, but books on history, naval strategy, and engineering. Peterson himself was a man in his late 60s, with a kind, intelligent face and eyes that seemed to see right through you. He wasn't the family lawyer, he was my father's strategist, his real counsel. "Your father was a brilliant man, Aaron," Peterson said, leaning back in his chair, "and a deeply paranoid one in his later years. A potent combination. He called this his Trojan horse's strategy. He saw the way the wind was blowing with Darren. He loved your brother, but he wasn't blind to his flaws. He knew that handing him the keys to the kingdom outright would be like giving a child a loaded gun. He confirmed everything the letter had said. The liquidation of the shares, the creation of the bearer bond, the establishment of the chattel deed trust. He explained the legal mechanics in a way I could understand. "The will read by Fitzwilliam is perfectly valid," Peterson explained, steepling his fingers. "It bequeaths the specific assets listed in the estate. Darren gets control of the company's operations. You get the car, but here's the genius of your father's plan. The controlling interest, the actual ownership of the company, wasn't an asset in the estate. It had already been legally converted and tied to another asset, the Falcon. So when the will gives you the car, it implicitly gives you the ownership of the company. Fitzwilliam doesn't know. Darren doesn't know. As far as the public record is concerned, Darren is the new king. But the real power resides with whoever holds the title to that car." I felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. "So what do I do now?" "For now, nothing," Peterson said with a wry smile. "We let the king have his reign. Your father was very specific about this part. He wanted Darren to have enough rope to hang himself with. He knew your brother. The moment he thinks he has absolute power, he will become reckless. He will overspend, make rash decisions, alienate clients. Your job is to simply document it. Be the quiet observer you've always been. But this time you're not a clerk, you're an auditor." He laid out the steps. "First, take the car's title, which Fitzwilliam's office would be mailing to me as a formality, and officially transfer it into my name at the DMV. A simple bureaucratic act that was in reality the most significant business transaction of my life. Second, use the key from the glove compartment to access the safe deposit box. I was to familiarize myself with the documents inside but leave the bearer bond itself secured. The bond is your nuclear option, Peterson cautioned. We don't use it until the time is right. For now, your power comes from the knowledge that you have it. We wait. We let Darren make his moves. When he inevitably tries to leverage the company for a loan or sell off a major asset, he'll hit a wall. He won't be able to prove clear ownership. That's when the panic will start. And that's when we'll be ready. He wasn't just a lawyer, he was a co-conspirator. My father's most loyal soldier, carrying out his general's final orders. I had an ally, a powerful one. The feeling was intoxicating. I walked out of his office not as Aaron Holt, the disappointment, but as Aaron Holt, the hidden power behind the throne. The next few days were a study in surrealism. I followed Peterson's instructions to the letter. A thick envelope arrived from Fitzwilliam's office containing the original title for the Falcon. I took a day off from my freelance IT work and went to the DMV. Standing in that soulless beige room, surrounded by people arguing over parking tickets and renewing licenses, I filled out the paperwork. The clerk, a bored woman with a formidable beehive hairdo, barely glanced at me as she stamped the forms and processed the transfer. For a fee of $15, I became the legal owner of Holt Marine Logistics. I had to suppress a laugh. Next, I went to Palmetto Heritage Bank, a quiet, old money institution where the tellers spoke in hushed tones. I presented the key and my ID. A bank officer led me down to the vault, a massive circular steel door straight out of a movie. He used his key, then mine, and opened a long, narrow safe deposit box. Inside there was a slim leather portfolio. My hands trembled as I lifted it out. I took it to a private viewing room and opened it. On top was another letter from my father, this one short and to the point. Remember, son, a wise man never reveals his strength until his enemy has revealed his weakness. Beneath the letter were the legal documents Peterson had described, meticulously outlining the trust, and at the very bottom was the bond. It was a simple, elegant piece of paper, heavy and embossed with the seal of a Swiss bank. It didn't look like much, but the number printed on it made my breath catch in my chest. It was a figure with 8 zeros. It was a king's ransom. I carefully placed everything back in the portfolio, slid the box back into its slot, and locked it. The nuclear option was armed and waiting. Meanwhile, King Darren's reign had begun, and it was exactly as my father had predicted. The first thing he did was redesign the CEO's office. He hired an expensive interior decorator and spent a rumored $100,000 on Italian furniture and a massive abstract painting that looked like a paint factory had exploded. He leased a brand new silver Porsche 911, which he parked ostentatiously in my father's old spot, the one marked Founder. He sent out a company-wide memo announcing his new, self-appointed title, President and Chief Executive Officer. My father had always just been president. Darren needed the extra qualifier, a sign of his own insecurity. He started holding strategy sessions at the most expensive steakhouses in Charleston, footing the bill on the company account. I knew this because I was still technically a consultant for their IT systems, and I could see the expense reports being filed. They were breathtaking in their audacity. About 2 weeks into his reign, he called me. His tone was magnanimous, dripping with condescension. "Aaron, buddy," he started, the fake bonhomie grating on my nerves. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine, Darren," I said, my voice level. "Listen, I was thinking. I know things must be tight for you and Brenda right now. The big corner office comes with big responsibilities, and one of those is looking after family. I'm creating a new position in the data analysis department. It's probably a step down from the freelance stuff you do, but it's stable, a steady paycheck. I'd be willing to offer it to you, to help you out. A data entry job." He was offering me a demotion, a pity job, a handout. The old me would have been stung by the insult. The old me might have even considered it, just to keep the peace, to have some connection to the family business. The new me saw it for what it was, an attempt to put me back in my box, to reinforce the hierarchy. That's very generous of you, Darren, I said, and I could almost hear him puffing up his chest on the other end of the line. But I'm going to have to decline. I'm quite happy with the work I'm doing now. There was a moment of stunned silence. He had expected me to be grateful, to grovel. My refusal didn't compute. Oh, he finally said, his voice suddenly cooler. Well, suit yourself. The offer's on the table if you change your mind. Don't come crying to me when that freelance stuff dries up. He hung up. The next call was from Brenda. Her tone had shifted dramatically from the rage and contempt of our last conversation. Now she was all wheedling and manipulative concern. Aaron, honey, she cooed. I was just talking to Darren. He told me about the job he offered you. Isn't that wonderful? It's a chance to get back in the company, to be part of the family again. Maybe you should reconsider. For us. There is no use right now, Brenda, I said, my voice colder than I intended. You made that clear. Don't be like that, she said, her voice taking on a plaintive edge. I was just upset. You have to understand my position. But Darren is being so generous. We could make this work. You just have to be willing to try. Be willing to accept my place as the court jester in her and Darren's kingdom. I saw it all now, the two of them, a united front of entitlement. I'm not taking the job, Brenda. I ended the call. I spent my days working on my own projects and my evenings in the garage with the Falcon. I'd bought a set of tools and some manuals. I started with the simple things: cleaning the engine, changing the oil, replacing the spark plugs. It was therapeutic. The smell of grease and gasoline was cleansing. Every bolt I tightened, every bit of rust I sanded away, felt like I was reclaiming a piece of myself. I was no longer just a tech guy. I was a builder, just like my father had said. The first crack in Darren's empire appeared a month later. It came in the form of a phone call from a man named George Henderson, the owner of Henderson Shipping, our biggest and oldest client. His family and my family had been doing business for 50 years. He didn't call Darren, he called me. Aaron, his gruff voice said. George Henderson here. Sorry to bother you at home, son, but I can't get a straight answer out of your brother or his new team of slick-haired yes-men. We've got a container of perishable goods that was supposed to ship to Rotterdam 3 days ago, and it's still sitting on the dock. Your father would have been on this like a hawk. What the hell is going on over there? I calmed him down, promised I'd look into it, and took detailed notes. I didn't have official access to the scheduling systems anymore, but I still had my old passwords. I logged in remotely. It was a mess. A cascading series of scheduling errors, all stemming from a new inefficient software Darren's team had implemented because it had a cooler-looking interface. I documented everything: screenshots, emails, the time and date of Henderson's call. I sent a detailed report to my personal email address and a blind carbon copy to Howard Peterson. The first piece of evidence. The first thread to be pulled. The silent takeover had begun. I didn't need to shout or make demands. All I had to do was let my brother's incompetence speak for itself, and it was speaking volumes. The real panic started about 6 weeks into Darren's reign. He had a grand vision, a bold new direction for Holt Marine. He wanted to acquire a smaller rival logistics company and expand into the air freight business. It was a massive, high-risk, high-leverage move, the kind of thing my father would have spent a year researching. Darren decided it over a round of golf. To fund this new venture, he needed to secure a massive line of credit from the company's longtime bank. He waltzed in there like he owned the place, which of course he thought he did. He presented his plan with all the slick confidence of a born salesman. The bank was initially receptive. Holt Marine was a pillar of the Charleston business community, a golden client. They began their due diligence, a standard procedure for a loan of that magnitude, and that's when Darren's world began to crumble. The bank's legal team asked for the corporate governance documents, the articles of incorporation, and most importantly, the share certificates, or a ledger showing clear ownership of the controlling interest. A formality. Darren told his new assistant to send them over. The assistant, a young woman who seemed perpetually frazzled, couldn't find them. She went to the family lawyer, Mr. Fitzwilliam. Fitzwilliam, flustered, said that the ownership was transferred through the will. The bank's lawyers replied, quite correctly, that a will transfers assets, but they needed to see the underlying proof of those assets. Where were the share certificates that Thomas Holt had owned? Fitzwilliam had no idea. Darren had no idea. They tore the office apart, searched every file cabinet, every safe. They couldn't find them, because they didn't exist anymore. They had been converted into a single piece of paper, locked in a safe deposit box that only I could access. Darren called me, his voice a tight coil of frustration. Aaron, I'm in a bit of a bind here. The bankers are being ridiculous, asking for all this old paperwork. You were always the one who knew where Dad kept everything. Do you have any idea where he would have stored his old share certificates? I was in my garage, my hands covered in grease, a wrench in my hand. I had just managed to get the Falcon's engine to turn over for the first time. The sound of it rumbling to life was the sweetest music I had ever heard. No, Darren, I said, my voice perfectly calm. I have no idea. You're the CEO now. I'm sure you'll figure it out. I could hear him sputtering with rage as I hung up the phone. The pressure on him was mounting. His grand expansion plan was stalled. The bank was getting impatient. Whispers started circulating in the Charleston business community. Holt Marine, once a rock of stability, was having trouble securing a loan. Clients were getting nervous. George Henderson called me again, not to complain, but just to check in. He was sniffing around for weakness. This is when Brenda reappeared. She showed up at my apartment one evening, unannounced. She had a key, but she knocked. A small concession, a test of the waters. I opened the door. She had been crying. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and her usual perfect makeup was slightly smeared. Aaron, she said, her voice thick with emotion, we need to talk. I stepped aside and let her in. She walked into the living room and surveyed the space. It was cleaner than she'd left it. I'd been taking care of myself. There was a stack of books on the coffee table about engine repair and classic car restoration. I've heard things, she began, wringing her hands. Darren he's a mess. The bank is going to pull his line of credit. He's yelling at everyone. People are talking about leaving the company. It's all falling apart. Is it? I asked, leaning against the doorframe, my arms crossed. Yes, and you're just here, polishing a car. Her voice rose with a familiar note of hysteria. This is your family's legacy, Aaron. It's our future. You can't just let him run it into the ground. You have to help him. It was an incredible performance. The concerned wife, the loyal family member. But I saw right through it. She wasn't worried about the family legacy. She was worried about the family bank account. The dream of a life of leisure was slipping through her fingers, and she was panicking. Why is this my responsibility, Brenda? I asked quietly. This is what he wanted. It's what you wanted. You wanted the guy who plays golf and makes deals, not the clerk who fixes things. Well, the deal maker is having some trouble with his deal. That's not my problem. How can you be so cold? She cried, tears welling in her eyes again. This isn't you, Aaron. The Aaron I know is kind. He's helpful. The Aaron you know was a doormat, I said, the words coming out harder than I expected. And he's not home right now. You made your choice, Brenda. You backed the wrong horse. Now you have to live with it. Her face fell. The mask of sorrow dissolved, replaced by a flash of her old familiar anger. You're enjoying this, aren't you? You're watching him fail, and you love it. It's not about revenge, I said, the words tasting like a lie, even as I said them, because a part of me, a dark and quiet part, was enjoying it. I was enjoying the slow, delicious turning of the tables. It's about consequences. She left soon after that, realizing her tears and manipulations had no effect on me anymore. The locks on the door to my emotions, once so easy for her to pick, had been changed. Cornered and desperate, Darren escalated things. He called for a family meeting, just him and me, at his new ridiculously expensive office. He was trying a new tactic, the brother-to-brother appeal. I walked in, and he was standing by the massive window, looking out over the port. He turned, and he looked haggard. The stress was getting to him. The designer suit hung a little looser on his frame. Aaron, he said, his voice strained, thanks for coming. We need to sort this out. He spent the next 20 minutes trying every trick in the book. He started with guilt. Dad would be so disappointed to see us like this. He'd want us to work together to protect his legacy. When that didn't work, he moved on to threats, a clumsy attempt at intimidation. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you need to stop. I can make things very difficult for you in this town. Don't think I won't cut you off completely." Finally, he resorted to bribery. He walked over to his huge empty desk and leaned against it. "Look, clearly, you're bitter. I get it. The will wasn't exactly fair, so let's fix it. I need you to help me find whatever paperwork these idiot bankers want. Help me smooth this over. Once the loan is approved, I'll write you a check, $1 million. Cash. Just sign a document saying you have no further claims on the company, and you can walk away set for life. Name your price. Just help me." He still didn't get it. He thought it was a paperwork problem. He thought my silence was a negotiating tactic, a way to squeeze more money out of him. He saw me as a disgruntled employee, holding out for a better severance package. He couldn't conceive of a world where he wasn't the one holding all the cards. I looked at him, at his tired, desperate eyes, at the fine sheen of sweat on his forehead. I felt a fleeting ghost of pity for him. He was a child who had been given a crown that was too heavy, and now it was crushing him. I stood up to leave. "I don't work for you, Darren," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I can't help you." "Everyone has a price, Aaron," he yelled after me as I walked toward the door. "What is it you want?" I stopped at the door and turned back to look at him, standing alone in the middle of his vast empty office. "I just want what's mine," I said, and I walked out, leaving him to stew in the silence of his collapsing kingdom. The final confrontation came a week later. Darren, completely out of options, decided to force my hand. He had Mr. Fitzwilliam, the family lawyer, send me a formal threatening letter demanding my presence at a meeting at the Holt Marine headquarters. The letter was full of legal jargon about fiduciary duty, family obligations, and the potential for legal action against me for obstructing company business. It was a bluff, and we both knew it, but it was the only move he had left. I agreed to the meeting. Howard Peterson advised me it was time. "He's shown his weakness," Peterson had said on the phone. "Now it's time to show your strength. Let him make his final desperate play in front of an audience. It will be more effective that way." I drove to the office not in my sensible sedan, but in the Falcon. I had spent the last 2 months restoring it. The engine purred like a contented lion. I'd sanded down the rust, treated it, and given it a fresh coat of the original seafoam green paint. I'd polished the chrome until it gleamed. It wasn't a rusty piece of junk anymore. It was a classic. It was beautiful. It was a statement. I parked it right in front of the main entrance, in the spot next to Darren's Porsche. I walked into the main conference room, the same one where my father used to hold his board meetings. It was a room I had rarely been invited into. Darren was sitting at the head of the long mahogany table, trying to look imposing. Fitzwilliam was beside him, shuffling papers nervously, and to my surprise, sitting on the other side of Darren, looking pale and anxious, was Brenda. Her presence was a clear tactic, meant to form a united front, to emotionally pressure me into submission. She refused to meet my eyes. "Aaron," Darren began, his voice tight and formal. "Thank you for coming. We need to end this foolishness." Fitzwilliam cleared his throat and launched into a prepared speech about the importance of family unity and the legal ramifications of my uncooperative stance. He spoke of Dad's intentions, of how he would have wanted a smooth transition. It was all nonsense, a smokescreen of legalese designed to intimidate me. When he was finished, Darren took over. He leaned forward, his eyes burning with a desperate fury. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but it's over," he seethed. "You've always been jealous. You've sat in the background your whole life, simmering with resentment, and now you're trying to sabotage me, to ruin everything Dad built, just out of spite." He slid a document across the polished surface of the table. It was thick, bound in a blue legal cover. "This is a settlement agreement," he said, his voice dropping to what he must have thought was a reasonable tone. "It confirms that you have no operational or ownership claims on Holt Marine Logistics. It releases the company from any future claims from you or your estate. Sign it, and I will transfer $1 million to an account of your choosing within 24 hours. A golden parachute for the golden screw-up. Take the deal, Aaron. It's the last one you're going to get." Brenda finally looked at me. her eyes pleading. "Aaron, please," she whispered. "Just sign it. Think of our future. My future. Not hers. Not ours. Mine. The $1 million wasn't for me. It was for her. It was her last desperate chance to salvage something from the wreckage of her ambitions." I didn't even glance at the document he'd pushed at me. I'd come prepared. I reached into the leather satchel I was carrying and pulled out 2 items. I placed them deliberately on the table, side by side, right next to his ridiculous settlement offer. The first was the official freshly issued title from the South Carolina Department of Motor Vehicles for one 1969 Ford Falcon. My name was clearly printed on the line for registered owner. The vehicle identification number was prominently displayed at the top. The second was a notarized, certified copy of the chattel deed trust instrument, prepared and authenticated by the law offices of Howard Peterson. Darren stared at the 2 pieces of paper, a look of complete confusion on his face. "What is this? Your car title? Are you insane?" "Read the other document, Darren," I said quietly. He snatched up the trust document, his eyes scanning the first page. Fitzwilliam, his curiosity piqued, leaned over to read along with him. I watched the color drain from my brother's face. His arrogant smirk faltered, trembled, and then collapsed entirely. His skin went from a healthy tan to a pasty, sickly gray. His eyes, wide with disbelief, darted from the paper to my face and back again. He started on the second page, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. Fitzwilliam pulled the document from Darren's limp fingers, his own face a mask of professional horror. He read it more slowly, his legal mind processing the inescapable implications of the words on the page. This is highly irregular," he stammered. "But, my God, if this is authentic, it's legally binding." "Oh, it's authentic," I said, my voice calm and steady. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Brenda was looking back and forth between us, her expression one of dawning terror as she tried to understand what was happening. "I don't understand," Darren whispered, his voice cracking. "What does this mean?" I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the table. It was time to end the charade. "You were right about one thing, Darren," I began, looking him directly in the eye. "Dad did leave you the company. He left you the offices, the trucks and the employees. He left you the job of managing it all." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "But he left me the ownership." I tapped my finger on the car title. "That rusty car, the one you and Brenda laughed at, that is the company. Its VIN is the legal anchor for the trust that holds the single bearer bond representing 100% of the controlling shares of Holt Marine Logistics." I then tapped the trust document. "And the title to that car is in my name." I let the full weight of it sink in. I watched the gears turning in his head, the denial, the confusion, the dawning, horrific comprehension. "So you're right," I continued, my voice devoid of malice, a simple statement of fact. "I don't work for you, and I don't need your $1 million bribe, because as of the moment the DMV stamped this title, you started working for me." Darren just stared at me, his mouth slightly open, a strangled, gurgling sound caught in his throat. I turned my gaze to Brenda. Her face was a canvas of pure, unadulterated shock. The blood had drained from her face, leaving her lipstick a stark, garish red against her pale skin. Her eyes were wide with a horror that was almost comical. She looked at me, then at the car title, then back at me. I could see the frantic calculations happening behind her eyes as her entire world, her entire 10-year plan, evaporated into thin air. She hadn't backed the wrong horse. She had abandoned the winning horse just before it crossed the finish line. I stood up, the chair scraping softly against the floor. "Now," I said, looking back at my brother, the new manager of my company, "let's talk about your performance over the last couple of months, because frankly, from an owner's perspective, it has been a little subpar." In the end, it wasn't a loud, dramatic explosion. It was more like a quiet, controlled demolition. I didn't fire Darren in a fit of vengeful rage. That would have been his move, not mine. I did it by the book. With Howard Peterson's guidance, I established a formal board of directors, consisting of myself, Peterson, and a respected independent financial advisor. I presented the board with the meticulously documented evidence of Darren's tenure as CEO, The reckless spending on his office, the exorbitant and non-essential travel, the disastrous implementation of new software, and, most damningly, the detailed complaint from our largest client, George Henderson. The board's decision was unanimous. Darren was removed from his position as president and CEO for gross mismanagement and actions detrimental to the company's financial health. I didn't have to be the bad guy. The numbers did all the talking. We offered him a generous severance package, far more than he deserved. But his pride, the same pride that had driven him his entire life, wouldn't let him take it. He saw it as a handout, a final humiliation. He stormed out of the office, shouting about how he would sue, how he would destroy me. He never did. He had no legal ground to stand on, and no money to pay a lawyer. He just faded away, leaving behind a mountain of personal debt and a leased Porsche he could no longer afford. Brenda, of course, tried to stage a comeback. She showed up at my door a few days later, a vision of remorse. She had cooked my favorite meal, the one she hadn't made in years. She cried, she apologized. She told me she had been confused, scared, and that she had never stopped believing in me. Not really. It was a masterful performance, worthy of a stage actress. "I always knew you had it in you, Aaron," she said, her voice trembling as she reached for my hand. "I was just trying to push you, to make you see your own potential. The old me might have fallen for it. The old me craved her approval so much I would have accepted any excuse. But I wasn't the old me anymore." I looked at her, at this beautiful woman who had shared my bed for a decade, and I felt nothing. The space inside me where my love for her used to be was just a cold, empty void. "No, you didn't, Brenda," I said, gently pulling my hand away. "You didn't believe in me. You believed in my father's money. You loved the idea of what I could provide, not the man I was. And when you thought that was gone, you were gone too. I can't ever unsee that. It's too late." The divorce was quiet and quick. She tried to argue for a larger settlement, claiming a stake in my newfound wealth, but Peterson shut that down immediately. The inheritance came after our separation, and she had no legal claim to it. She walked away with half of our shared assets, a 5-year-old sedan and half the equity in our small apartment. The life she had schemed for had vanished. The last I heard, she was living with her sister again, working as a receptionist at the dental clinic. I owned a multi-million-dollar company, but the truth was I had no passion for it. I wasn't my father. My world wasn't made of shipping containers and freight schedules. It was made of code and logic. So I made another decision. Over the next 6 months, with Peterson's expert guidance, I prepared Holt Marine Logistics for sale. I stabilized the company, reassured the clients, and promoted a competent, long-serving vice president to take over. I sold it to a larger, respectable firm that I knew would take care of the employees, the people who had been the true backbone of the company all along. The sale made me a wealthy man beyond my wildest dreams, but the money wasn't the victory. The victory was the freedom it bought me, the freedom to finally be myself. I took a portion of the funds and started my own software development company, building the kind of logistics and inventory management solutions I had dreamed of creating when I was 22. It was a success, because it was built on passion, not entitlement. And the Falcon, I kept the Falcon. I finished the restoration myself, bolt by bolt. It sits in the garage of my new house, a house I bought with my own money, earned from my own work. It's not just a car, it's a monument. It's a reminder that value isn't always shiny and new. Sometimes it's hidden under a layer of rust, waiting for someone with the patience to see what's really underneath. It's a symbol that the greatest inheritance isn't money or power, but the character to build your own life, on your own terms. You know, it's a strange thing to look back on. For so many years, all I wanted was their approval. I twisted myself into knots, trying to be the son my father wanted, the brother Darren could respect, the husband Brenda desired. I thought if I was just responsible enough, quiet enough, helpful enough, that one day they would finally see me. But the truth is, they were never looking. It wasn't about revenge in the end, until it was. It had to be. It was the only language they understood. They saw strength as aggression and kindness as weakness. The only way to win was to stop playing their game and start playing my own. Maybe you've felt that way too. Maybe you've been the one in your family, or your job, or your circle of friends who is always taken for granted. The one who cleans up the messes, who provides the quiet support, while others take the credit. You do it for so long you start to believe the story they tell about you. You start to wonder if maybe you are the crazy one, the one who is too sensitive, the one who should just be grateful for the scraps they throw you. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have taken the $1 million bribe and just walked away? Would you have fired your brother on the spot and enjoyed the moment? Or would you have tried to reconcile with your wife? I want to know what you think, so let me know in the comments below. And if you've ever had to make a choice, a hard choice, to finally stand up for yourself and demand what you're worth, I want to hear that story too. We can all learn from each other. Thanks for listening, and if you enjoyed my story, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more content just like this.